93, 93, 93. This is the man I should renew from IshouldRenew.com. And now we will be talking about Zelensky. Who is he really and what is really going on in Ukraine? Here are the facts. So I'm going to play a YouTube video. It's about 5 minutes, and this pretty much breaks down everything that's really going on outside of the Western media. We have who we want Zelensky to be or who we think he is versus who he actually is. So let me give the commentary while the video plays. And I'll stop it, if I have something to say. But here we go. And let me turn this music down just a little bit. Hold on. So music may be a little loud, so excuse me for that. All right, there we go. Okay, let me put it back on screen. Okay, here we go. I'll play it.
Now, I know I'm at odds with most of my colleagues on this station and our network guests on this next item, but I really feel I can't bite my tongue any longer. You see, I think the president of the Ukraine is not all that he's portrayed as by the Western media. I mean, if you believe the spin, he's the second coming of Winston Churchill, and he'll be remembered as the great hero saving his people from the evil Russians. I'm the first to admit that Putin isn't a good guy either, but what the West glosses over is the terrible things that have happened to the primarily ethnic Russian people in parts of the Ukraine under Zelensky's rule. These people comprise the largest Russian community outside of Russia, and they make up about 17% of the Ukrainian population. And they live.
So what he just said is 70% of the population of Ukraine are actually Russian people. So that means majority of the people in Ukraine are actually Russians. But let's see how they're treated.
Primarily Russian regions and have effectively been in a civil war with the Ukrainian government since 2015.
So what he's saying is the Russians in Ukraine have been at odds since 2015. So they have felt mistreated since 2015. So that's about 7 years ago. For the last 7 years, the Russian people that live in Ukraine have been at a civil war. See, again, we're not going to hear this on the Western media. It's just all about Putin. But this is what's actually going on in Ukraine and what has led up to this. But let us continue.
This was just after they were promised a vote on independence in 2014. That vote has never taken place.
So they were supposed to vote in 2014 for independence, but it never happened. They, just pushed it to the side and act like it wasn't an issue at all. They just buried it, and the people just had to continue to suffer. Let's continue.
Zelensky promised to end the civil war. He clearly hasn't done so. Instead, he's facilitated the goading of the Russians by endorsing the right sector, whose leader publicly claimed he fed the bones of Russian children to his pet wolf. Now, apparently that was a joke, but it must have been lost on the Russians, and particularly those who felt they'd been mistreated by Ukrainian troops.
So the Ukrainian troops have been mistreating the Russian people for quite some time. So way before this Ukrainian conflict has popped off, Ukraine has been mistreating the Russian people that lived in Ukraine, that have always been at odds. They have been in a civil war. But again, we're not going to hear about these things. They want us to believe that everything was all good, and then Putin came around and just started, causing this chaos. But according to the actual evidence here, that's the furthest thing from the truth. Let's continue.
Here's how Time magazine described one of them, the neo-Nazi Azov movement, just last year.
So they actually called them a white supremacist. It's a white supremacist agenda, which is why Putin calls it a neo-Nazi agenda and why he needs to destroy the neo-Nazism in Ukraine because of what has actually been going on in Ukraine, which we're not going to hear, except till now.
Commentator Glenn Greenwald sums it up nicely with this tweet. No rational person thinks Ukrainian neo-Nazi militias justify this war, but it's dangerous madness to scoff at the impact of arming them as the West is doing. In the words of President...
So basically what they're saying is we're putting guns in the hands of neo-Nazis. And they're saying, okay, that doesn't justify what Putin is doing, but we're basically arming this so-called white supremacist agenda that has already been occurring in Ukraine for the past 7 years. So all this money we've been throwing into Ukraine, and we're throwing the money under the guise of, okay, we need to protect the Ukrainian people from Putin, when in actuality we're actually furthering their agenda that has already been occurring for the past 7 years. Let's continue.
Zelensky, they are what they are.
Have you clear something up for us? And this is these reports about the Azov Battalion that is said to be Nazi-affiliated organization operating as a militia in your country, said to be committing their own atrocities. What should Americans know about that unit, about those reports?
So Azov was one of those many battalions. They are what they are.
I also want to point out that Zelensky sought to join NATO against another Ukrainian agreement that was set to maintain neutrality between Russia and Europe. And even as Russian troops were amassing along the border, the foolish US Vice President Kamala Harris publicly supported Zelensky's bid to join NATO.
So I will say what I know we all say, and I will say over and over again. The United States stands firmly with the Ukrainian people in defense of the NATO alliance.
You don't think that was about provoking Russia? Well, I do.
And it was absolutely about provoking Russia, because we are clearly funding what's occurring in Ukraine now. So we're using the war as a distraction to actually fund the neo-Nazism that is occurring in Ukraine and what they're doing to the Russian people inside of Ukraine. Let us continue.
In any event, like most marketers, Zelensky knows that image is everything. That's why he's always pictured wearing his army green t-shirt. You see, it portrays him as a man of action and part of the front line. Well, that myth was debunked early in the campaign when his staged pick-ops in battle regalia were exposed as totally contrived.
So what he's saying is they have been cooking up lies to make us think that he's this military leader, and it all turned out to be a bunch of props. Imagine that.
Since then, it's been the t-shirt of disrespect, which he's paraded in every single parliament around the world just about, begging for more money and arms, as one of the most corrupt countries in Europe.
So he's saying Ukraine is literally one of the most corrupt countries in Europe. Now, when has the Western media told you that? And they're not going to tell you that, but we see that's actually what's going on the ground way before this conflict started.
And he even wore it on his Vogue magazine photo shoot this week. It was as contrived as everything else as far as I'm concerned, and it was just like what we've seen being presented in this war. The propaganda coming out of the presidential office rivals only that coming out of the Kremlin. It's just that one side's lies are being dutifully regurgitated across the Western world to sustain a proxy war. It's a battle between the East and the West. Few are seeking to diffuse this conflict, and instead I think many of them are much more intent on escalating it and potentially creating World War III.
So what he's saying is they want this to happen. They want to initiate World War III as a cover-up to what's actually going on. Because as long as we can blame it on Putin, which you see they can't help but to say this man's name, and he's the reason why all this is occurring. As long as they can push the blame on Putin, they're going to continue to further their agenda, which will lead us right into a conflict even greater than what we are experiencing now. So this is all planned.
To my mind, and I've said this right from the start, the simple answer to this conflict is to allow the Minsk agreement, which allows the predominantly Russian areas to vote on their independence.
So basically, though, because Russians make up 70% of the population in Ukraine, they still are not able to vote on their independence. So they have been suppressed. You can say they're basically the black people in Ukraine. They're been treated like black people in Ukraine because they don't have rights like they are supposed to.
Zelensky is opposed to that proposal, and instead he's banned the Russian language in the public service, he's banned a dozen opposition parties, and he's shut down non-state-run media.
So you are not even allowed to use the Russian language in certain public platforms. They have pretty much banned it, and they're banning anything Russian. That is the agenda in Ukraine, to ban all things Russian. And because 70% of the population is Russian, what do you think that does for the people when they can't even speak their own language in certain public spaces?
He's also busy entertaining attention-seeking politicians from all over the world, including our own Prime Minister and Nancy Pelosi, of course. And his wife, well, she's busy visiting the White House while posing for Vogue. Something about all of this doesn't add up. There's an agenda at work in the Ukraine that is much greater than staving off the Russian invaders.
So there you go. So I just wanted to give the actual evidence here, other than my personal opinion. Now you have it from a news outlet that's just tired of the bullshit, because they see what's really going on, and we see this is less about Putin than we truly realize. So hopefully that brought some light as to what's really going on the grounds of Ukraine, and how the Russian people in Ukraine are being suppressed, and Zelensky has no plans of giving them their independence. So hopefully this helps you to understand better why things are happening the way they happen. And with that, I bear peace. 93, 93, 93.